You're listening to the Play Therapy Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks, your source for centered and focused play therapy coaching.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, and this is the Play Therapy Podcast. I am so happy to be back with you all. I apologize that it has been a few-week break. We have had a very, very busy month. We celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary and went to Key Largo for a week. The week after that, we moved into a new house. And then the week after that, we left for a baseball trip to watch the Tampa Bay Rays play the Tigers and the Brewers in Michigan and in Wisconsin. So we are home, and I'm very excited to be back with you, but I am sorry that it has taken several weeks. And I've missed being with you all, so I'm happy to be back and ready to dive into today's episode. Today, we are talking through the logistics and techniques of your playroom. So we finally made it to the point where we can actually start talking about the skills, the techniques, the practical application of all of this child-centered play therapy. So this is kind of the first piece of all of the skills. So I'm really excited that we got through the foundational stuff and now we can talk through logistics. So I want to spend some time sharing with you things that I have learned over the years and some of the things that Van Fleet and the Cochrans also talk about. So we're going to discuss what your toy selection process is, what your playroom setup is, just kind of the basics there. In a future episode, we will talk through the actual toys because those fall into categories. But that'll be in a future episode. So today we're going to talk about how you set up your space, the logistics of that, and how you think about your space, whatever that happens to be. So sometimes there are traveling play therapists that set it up at a new environment every time. Some of you share a playroom, some of you have your own playroom. So I know it will vary based on where you're working and your circumstances, but these are kind of the broad basics. So just as a general rule, when you're thinking about your space, you don't want it too small, but you don't want it too big. And what is kind of standard across the board is that you're typically wanting about 120 to 150 square feet. That is kind of the sweet spot of a playroom. 200 square feet is going to be the biggest that you want it, because beyond that, it's too difficult for the child to regulate. They often feel very lost in an area that's too big, and they don't feel able to control themselves and pull themselves together. And so you want to make sure that it is small enough that they feel safe and that there are boundaries, but not so small that there's no room to play and move. So between 120 and 200 square feet is kind of your sweet spot of space. And of course, yes, you can work with bigger or smaller, but that's the ideal. So that's helpful to know. And then you want to make sure that you have an assortment of toys that are appealing to kids. And like I said, in a future episode, we'll actually talk through specifics and what categories those toys are in and things like that. But you want to make sure that you have these general things in mind. Number one, the toys are selected, not collected. So you don't just accumulate a whole bunch of toys and throw them in a room together. You want to be purposeful about your selections. And as a general rule, you want them to be very generic. So I call them old school toys. I suppose maybe there are other terms for them, but you want them to be very basic, simple, not pop culture, not necessarily current. You want it to be a kind of traditional toy flair. So, balls, hula hoops, punching bags, art supplies, musical instruments, puppets, jewelry, dress-up stuff. I mean, just basic toys that children have been playing with for decades. That's what you want to think about when you're forming your playroom setup. And here's what's important. The toys and your structure within your playroom, they need to be consistent from week to week. So you want to make sure that your toys are put back in the same general area in the same general way each week. Now, are there going to be days when you do not have time to fully clean your playroom in between clients and stuff is on the floor instead of where it normally is? Yes, of course, we deal with that all the time. But as a general rule, you want to make sure that if you're acting out aggressive toys are on the left when you walk in, that's where they stay. If your artistic toys are in the back of the room, that's where they stay. So you want them to remain consistent because kids feel safe within that consistency. And that makes your therapeutic hour most efficient. So that's very important to keep in mind that yes, it's not always perfect, but it is consistent, generally speaking, where things go. So broad picture of the big things that you're going to want. Specific toys we'll talk through in the future. But you want to make sure that you have these broad categories. You, of course, want child-sized furniture. You don't want kids to be in chairs that are too tall, tables that are too tall. You want everything to be child size appropriate. So you don't want your bookshelves to be more than about 4 feet high. You don't want your chairs and tables to be too tall. Think as you create your playroom with children in mind. You would want a kitchen of some sort. So it doesn't have to be, an actual, what were those? Like easy bake oven kind of kitchens. It doesn't have to be something fancy like that. But you want to have something that allows them to mix food and drink and pour things and things like that. So a kitchen of sorts. You definitely want a dollhouse of some kind with dolls. You want some type of art setup. So a blackboard, a whiteboard, an easel, something along those lines, which really kind of lends itself toward a lot of things. They can do traditional artwork, but they can also pretend they're the teacher at school. They can leave you a message. They have a lot of freedom when you have some kind of board or easel that they can use. And you want to make sure that your own personality is in your playroom, but that it's not distracting. So there are 5 play therapists at my center, and every single one of our rooms has a little bit of a different flair. They all contain the same types of toys. They all have the same category representations. They all are laid out the same way. There's a sink in everyone. There's a rug in everyone. We all have mostly the same things, but each room has its own flair and its own taste because the therapist put their own touch. So some therapists decorate the walls, and it kind of has their personality there. Some leave their walls blank because they want it to feel neutral to the child and feel that they have a blank slate. So every therapist's personality comes out in their playroom, and that's okay. You just want to make sure that it's not distracting. So again, big picture, overly structured toys are not really that helpful in child-centered play therapy, meaning games with a lot of rules, anything where there's a lot of structure, that is not necessarily appropriate. Similarly, you don't want any kind of screens. So you don't want any kind of computers, electronic games, handheld games, tablets, anything like that. Anything electronic, also not appropriate because kids just get lost in their game and they're not actually listening to the therapist anymore after that. And you want to make sure that you're thoughtful with what you're putting in there. So I'm going to give you the main categories of toys. And then, like I said, in the future, we'll actually dive into the specific details of each category. But some will tell you there are 3 categories, and some child-centered play therapists will tell you there are 5. I'm going to give you 5, but I will help you understand what the 3 are that the others talk about. So if you're falling into the 5 category camp, you would know that there are family or nurturing toys, communication toys, aggressive toys, mastery toys, and creative expression toys. That is if you use 5 categories. I was trained with 3, and the 3 that we learned were acting out aggressive, real life, and creative artistic expression. So as you can see, with those 3, all 5 that were previously mentioned can be put into those 3. So we're really kind of talking the same thing, but it's just whether or not you divide it into 5 official categories or 3. But in the next episode, we will absolutely talk through what those are and what they include. Keep in mind, you do need to have an awareness of your own tolerance level for messy toys. So some child-centered play therapists really have a hard time with aggressive children and aggressive play. Some child-centered play therapists have a really difficult time with sand play because sand gets everywhere. Some have a very difficult time with messy materials, such as Play-Doh, slime, paint, things like that. So you have to be aware of your own tolerance level, and you have to be aware of what you are willing and able to have in your playroom so that you can continue to accept the child if they get to a point where they're making a mess and you realize you're going to have to clean it up and you're only going to have 5 minutes to do so. And oh my word, there's slime on the carpet and whatever. So you have to test your own ability to handle those things before you know whether you want messy materials in your playroom or not. Some choose not to have them, some have no concern for them whatsoever, and some hate them but have them anyway. So you may fall in one of those 3 camps. Okay, another thought. Child-centered play therapy is appropriate for children 3 to 12. We've talked about that before. However, kids in the 10 to 12-year-old range tend to be a little bit awkward sometimes with entering the playroom. And it can cause some resistance. They can feel a little bit disgruntled, uncomfortable. There's just a tone that comes when a child who feels that they're too mature to have a room full of toys and they don't know what to do with it. So it is helpful to be aware of that and to accommodate for that. So what we do is we make sure we have toys that are older child appropriate. And those might be playing cards, yo-yos, thumb balls, any kits that allow them to make things. So like scratch kits, origami kits, something like that, where they can do something a little bit more developed and it's still very neutral and playful, but it does allow them to feel that there's a little bit more older options in the playroom. So that is helpful to keep in mind too as you're setting it up. And there are only a couple more things I want to go over. The first is often new play therapists or people that are just setting up their playroom for the first time feel that it's going to cost a fortune to set up a playroom. So let me alleviate some of those fears. You do not have to go out and buy everything new, and you do not have to go out and spend a fortune to equip a playroom. As a matter of fact, they suggest that you have used toys in with the new because you don't want there to be a sense of you can't play here because everything is so brand new and perfect, and there's a feeling of everything is clean, everything is perfect, everything is brand new. Kids need to feel that they're ready to use. So you actually do want to have some already used toys when you're starting out. So where do you find those? Flea markets, thrift stores, garage sales. You can find gems for your playroom at all of those places. One of my therapists, when setting hers up, actually went to like a children's consignment, found some really great things. So don't be afraid to be creative with where you get those things. Just keep in mind they need to be selected and they need to be sturdy. Don't spend money on things that are going to break, that are going to wear out, that are not going to be in it for the long haul, because then you're just going to have to spend more money to replace it. So they do have to be sturdy and able to withstand hours and hours of hard play in the playroom. And then one final thing. This is kind of your encouragement for the episode because this is a really important thought. And this is actually in the Cochran's book. I encourage you to get their book and the Van Fleet book. But you have to remember that you are the best toy in the playroom. And they talk about this in the book. Rogers says your way of being, and every child-centered play therapist's way of being is different. We all are guided by the same principles, and we all use the same core conditions and Axeline's 8 principles and all of those things. So that doesn't change. But our individual way of being makes that experience unique. And so nothing is more important than how you are. Your way of being in the playroom is the most important piece. And Gary Landreth has one of the most important quotes, I think, on this topic. I'm actually going to quote it for you. When you are working at your very best, the therapeutic opportunity you provide will feel to the child like putting on a well-worn, warm sweater, familiar and comfy with room to stretch and grow. Isn't that amazing? So the thought is, yes, we need to be purposeful and thoughtful with the way that we set up our playrooms. We need to have appropriate toys selected. They need to represent all of the categories. There's a lot of forethought that goes into setting up a playroom. However, the child-centered perspective says when you are working at your best, you are going to provide what the child needs. And there's safety there. There's a relationship there that you provide consistently week to week. And that surpasses any toy, any setting, any environment. They will feel like they're putting on a well-worn, warm sweater, familiar and comfy, with room to stretch and grow. So don't feel overwhelmed by setting up your child-centered playroom. Next episode, we will talk through the specific toys that you want out of each category, so that will give you kind of a checklist. But keep in mind, you are the most important toy because the relationship that you build with them is the most therapeutic thing in your playroom. So I hope that encourages you. I hope that you are excited to have the playroom that you've always wanted, either add to the one you have, change it, starting from scratch. There's all levels of play therapists listening, but I'm really excited that we have a framework to follow and we're able to set up a playroom where kids can thrive and grow and be the best version of themselves. So thank you so much for being with me. Thank you for being a part of the Play Therapy Podcast. We'll talk again soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more episodes and resources, please go to www.playtherapypodcast.com.